The 11th hour. I am upon my departure, but my love will remain. It will scintillate boldly through all the tears and the pain. This will be a challenge, and you will see that it will hurt. But it never has to be something brash or something curt. We have spent many moments in high spirits and smiles as our bond has been strengthened and lasted all the while. True friends we have become, and memories we have shared. Many times of fellowship, camaraderie, and care. We were bound to have to separate at one time or other, to have to test our friendship for the sake of one another. No memories can be stolen from us, and our time we will never be forgotten. In our minds they will be fresh, still active, and trotting. If you are true to me, time away will only give us joy, because your friendship was real, never treated as a toy. We will confide in one another, just the same as we always have. Just as we have so far, as we've traveled down this path, life may take us many places and scatter us about. But we are only physically divided, and all you have to do is shout. If you need me to be there mentally, I surely will be. Because all that moment is that I love you as you do me. If all we have is true, you will know I could never leave your side. Even with thousands of miles between us, I am moments shy of hearing your daily issues and all your praiseworthy events or the situation with life that you tried to prevent. Only a phone call away, I am still here when you cry. I'm still in your life. To help those same tears dry, we can still make it through the rain together and talk about our fears. We should still never forget this time we've shared in all the years. Yes, we will miss the personal contact which we are used to, but a real bond can do without that, I do believe. Do you? I still want to be your friend wherever I go. How much you mean to me, regardless of where I am, I'll be first to show all we had. The distance to me will only be a tragic mishap, one that will never ruin us or alter this bond in any way. Our times, I will keep in my heart every day. Make it through this journey with me, and please hold on with every ounce of your power, because your endurance will be wonderfully rewarded on the very day I return. We will have survived this suspension of time and my 11th hour.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brandon and Gil. I'm Port. We're going to hear some more from her during our break. You are now tuned in to the Houston Media Source Public Access Public Affairs. And we have a tremendous show, roundtable for you tonight. I'm your host, Robert McKinley Gilmore, Sr. And our topic generally is mental help. People need help. And I have got a distinguished panel with me this first hour, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves right now.
Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. Carl Matthews, and I am a faith-based coordinator. I'm here tonight to participate in this conversation and see how I can be an asset in sharing with coordinating services that will help our community become healthier and whole. God bless you.
Hi, I'm Waukesha McKinney. I am the board chair for the Southeast Texas chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I'm also a survivor of suicide loss, and just an overall advocate and speaker for and help seeker, of course, for those who have been affected by suicide.
Hi, my name is Dr. Dina Votes. I am a psychology instructor as well as a yoga instructor, and I am here to offer any help towards helping individuals looking from a different way, an alternative way as far as mind, body, and spirit.
One of the great tragedies in our society is we don't recognize what mental illness or mental disease does to individuals. We see the results of it. And I always try to share this. This came from the World Health Organization. Now, listen to this. The definition of mental health as a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And one of the crisis situations that our country is facing, our communities, is suicides and overdoses. And I want you, Ms. McKinney, to start off and help us understand, as the representative of that particular foundation, how impactful? Tell us how impactful.
Suicide is a very right now it's a very major issue, and it affects communities at large. I think one of the common misconceptions about suicide is that it's an individualistic problem. So it's for that one person who dies by suicide, it's their problem. So the assumption is that when they die, the problem goes away. However, we have research and studies that show that there is a large impact on individuals. So take into consideration that one person dies by suicide every 11 minutes, about 11.7 minutes.
Every 11 minutes.
11.7 minutes. Now, in addition to that one person is dying, we also have 25 attempts. So those who have survived
within 11 minutes,
within that time frame, right? And so when you look at those statistics and those numbers, you're looking at right now a growing issue. Take into consideration the individual that attempts. They have to go to the hospital. They have to go to the emergency room. As far as data recorded, when we know someone is attempted, most likely they've ended up in the hospital. That's how we get the numbers, right? So for those 25 people who end up in the hospital, there are medical bills, there's psychiatric care, which is not covered like regular physical care. So there's more expenses. There's long-term treatment that's needed, and other things that go into play. So on the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention's website, right now, in 2016, suicide cost our country $69 billion annually. $69 billion. Suicide.
We're not talking about overdoses.
No, we're talking about suicide. So when you think about that, that breaks down that misconception of it's an individual problem, right? Because when you think about it, every 11.7 minutes, we're losing someone to suicide. That's roughly about 45,000 people a year. So on top of that, for every one suicide death, there are 25 attempts. So for every 11 minutes, we have 25 attempts. The numbers, suicide deaths cost our country $69 billion annually. So it's not an individual issue. It's a public health problem. On the positive side of that, though, we also know that from a public health perspective, suicide is preventable. And that is the message that's really important. It's the 10th leading cause of death, second leading cause of death for teens and young adults. And so it is a major problem. However, it is preventable. However, there needs to be community education to make that happen. There needs to be more conversations. It needs to become a conversation at the table. Right now, suicide is the S word.
I've got to ask you certainly, when you include overdoses, that exacerbates. I think the figure was 66,000 last year.
When you look at the number of overdoses,
which we in this opioid crisis, some people could potentially be considered have committed suicide with the overdose.
Yes,
but it's not reported that way.
It may not be reported that way. If a person has a drug overdose and dies from a drug overdose, they're going to list it as a death from a drug overdose. Whether that person, if there are other indicators, a letter or something else that indicate that the person had intended to die by suicide, then they would list it as a suicide. However, it may very well be that there's some crossover between drug overdose and suicide deaths. We definitely know that a person who abuses substances, whether it be drugs or alcohol, are higher risk for dying by suicide. And so there's definitely some overlap. I don't have research or data to show that right now, but there is some overlap there for sure.
Dr. Votes, I mean, do you, as a person who deals with the mind, body, and spirit, do you see any potential alternatives that might be beneficial? Because if we're an appeal society, you go into the appeals, so that leads to the potential overdose.
Right.
I mean, what should people begin to understand in terms of alternatives?
I think you have to build a foundation, and the foundation starts with self and dealing with the self from all angles. And when I say all angles, it's dealing with the mind, body, and spirit. We're living now in a biopsychosocial world.
A what?
A biopsychosocial. Break it down.
Okay, let's get some clarity.
Okay, let me break it down.
Explain to our audience. You done put a big word out there.
Okay, so when I say biopsychosocial, what I'm saying is that everything affects us on different levels: a biological level, a psychological level, and a social level. Biopsychosocial. So, and we can't leave out the spiritual level. So, when we're dealing with an individual, we have to deal with all levels of that individual. So many people now, depression plagues millions of people, but a lot of them, they don't talk about it. Why? Because a lot of them don't want to seek medical help for various reasons. Some afraid of the medicine, get addicted to medicine and things of that nature. What people need to know is that there's an alternative method, and one of the alternative methods is yoga. There's a misconception that yoga is about stretching and getting yourself in a press-up pose when yoga is so much more. Yoga encompasses, is a 3-part discipline. It encompasses meditation, breathing, and physical posture. But when people hear yoga, they only know of the physical posture. What many individuals now need to be educated on is the meditation aspect and the breathing. The breathing is the most important aspect of yoga because breathing allows you to bring in oxygen. More oxygen, then you're stimulating your body. And when you can stimulate your body, in essence, you're stimulating each organ. And when you're stimulating your organs, it's then allowing you to live a happy, healthier life. Like I said before, so many of us are depressed. Know it or not know it, we're depressed. We go through a level of depression. And what I know from a psychological standpoint is depression is not necessarily bad, but when it's in a prolonged state is when it becomes detrimental to an individual. And sometimes we are not aware that we're even in that prolonged state. So once we find that out, once an individual know that, I think it's about building a foundation and knowing how yoga can be implemented
Alternative.
as an alternative method.
Preacher, it would appear to me that many people are disconnected from this, would you say,
Biopsychosocial. Just think about biological, psychological, and social. Biopsychosocial.
Mind, body, soul sort of thing.
Exactly.
Spirit. Okay.
Right.
Exactly.
So the spiritual part is the results when we get the call from family members that a child or loved one has been found.
I mean, so basically what I'm hearing is that if it's a biopsychosocial, depression can be encountered or experienced if you don't like the way you look, obesity, whatever physical health chronic condition you may be facing.
More so than a diagnosis of you depressed, that you can, every day, I guess you could be somewhat depressed.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Especially if you don't, especially if you suffer from any aspect of perhaps low self-esteem,
Right.
or you don't love yourself,
Right.
Exactly.
those kind of things. But one of the things that as you were talking about that, I was thinking about how many people are educated to understand when they are in depression,
Okay.
or understanding that they're depressed. I think that's a very crucial.
Or what it is based upon.
Well, the symptoms of it,
Yeah.
I mean, being aware and tuned to yourself,
Right.
biopsychosocial, and tuned to yourself to know that you're not functioning at 100%.
Right.
I think that's the key right there. You
Yeah.
have to be in tune to yourself, whether it be you're feeling depressed or what your normal state is
Right.
and what your not normal state is.
Exactly.
Right? And so, or what your healthy state is and what your not healthy state is. Like,
Right.
when you're catching a cold, you feel those symptoms come
Sure,
on.
absolutely.
However, unfortunately, most people don't find out what the symptoms of depression are until they are in depression.
Depression.
And so they go to the doctor and they, find out, okay, so this is why I'm not sleeping. This is why I'm eating too much and not eating enough. Or this is why I keep playing these things over in my mind now. I'm depressed. Now when we put a name to it, now there's time for treatment.
Exactly.
However, like you mentioned, Dina, right?
That's correct.
Well, like you mentioned, Dina, then there's the fear of, I got to take psych meds.
Exactly.
You know, and so then that becomes a concern, you know, but it starts with being very aware of your body, your mind, what is a healthy state for you, a productive state for you, and what is a non-productive state. I know over the years with dealing with depression following my brother's suicide, I have learned what my triggers are. So I know when it's dark outside, or when the weather it has been dark, I need to take better care of myself. I need to make sure that I'm taking my antidepressants during that time, because I can become severely depressed. I need to make sure that I keep a schedule and I keep a task list, because I'm forgetful. You know, and so those are the things that I've learned over years. You know, and that comes with learning your biopsychosocial self. You know, and so learning those three parts of yourself and your spiritual self as well. You know, because your spiritual self does play a big part in it, at least for me.
And I never shall forget my young in the ministry.
Right.
At a church, I had the thought that when you call to the ministry, that God gave you some kind of intuitiveness, power to recognize when people going through something.
Really?
Yeah, I was very vulnerable, naive
You
in
thought
ministry.
everybody had the glow.
You got depressed quick.
Especially when a parishioner who came to church, who sat in the back of the church, and that evening committed suicide, and I found out about it 2 days later.
Stop.
You know, I began to go through this guilt trip. Why didn't I have this spiritual insight to see
What
that?
do they call it? Discernment. I think it's called
discernment.
It's called discernment.
Yeah. So I guess that leads to the question, a segue to the question: what does depression look like? Does it have a look?
I think it depends on the individual.
Yeah.
That's the tricky part of it. It depends on the individual. And when you were talking about the triggers, you have to find out, what are your triggers? It's all about a person going back to self and finding out what worked for that individual. I'm always, like in psychology, I teach them like a number line. I'm about integrating subjects. I teach psychology, but I let them know, if you're majoring in math, science, it doesn't matter. It all should be integrated so to get a bigger picture.
Right.
So when you think from that standpoint, I use like a number line. Like if you remember from math, we had that 0 in the middle, then we had the negative number, and we have the positive.
Right.
Yeah.
So if we all put ourselves at that 0, that's the balance, homeostasis that we're looking for. But sometimes we have to go to the extreme in order to know where our 0 is.
Yeah.
So sometimes you're going to go so far to the negative, which is neither good nor bad. It's just a matter of going to that extreme to know, okay, I need to bring it in a little bit to bring it over to the other end. And sometimes we may go too far to this end. The goal is to try to find the 0, the balance. And that 0 differs for each one of us as individuals.
Well,
So,
is that what you consider the knowing the self?
and that's what I consider as knowing the self. And that's what life, I think, for myself is all about, is getting to know yourself, and we've lost that. I think each and every day we should take note of ourselves. Like what I found interesting is that I teach yoga, and I've noticed that most individuals do not know how they breathe, something that's with you every day. You know, and breathing.
Stop breathing, see what happens.
Exactly.
Well, that's what happens with people suicide. Do you intend to go through the experience to see what death is? I attempted suicide twice. So, I mean, at that time, there was a sense of hopelessness.
Yes.
It's
It's not necessarily, when a person considers suicide, it's not necessarily that they want to die.
Right.
Which is a very common misconception. It's that they don't want to die. They want to stop hurting. And not physical pain, but emotional, mental pain. I want this to stop. I want this trauma to stop. I want to stop having nightmares. I want to stop all of these things that are affecting my day-to-day, so they can't function the way they used to. So they look at suicide as an option for dealing with a problem, as opposed to, I want to die. They know that it is a consequence of suicide and dying.
Don't you think that superimposes self-medication, which again goes to the overdoses?
Running from pain. You know, I definitely consider that, and this is my personal thought and opinion on substance abuse. I think that those individuals who struggle with substance abuse don't become addicts on purpose. The intention is, oh, I'm gonna get high, I'm gonna feel good for a little while, I just need to take this drug so I can study or
it takes
whatever the
over.
issue is, and then it takes over.
Exactly.
You know, and then if you couple that with trauma, or a person who's dealt with trauma in their life, or you couple that with some recent pressures, depression, maybe there is a predisposition for mental illness because family members have had mental illness, and now you are abusing drugs on top of that, you're triggering all of these things to happen at once. So now what you used to take, you need to take a little more of that to continue to numb the pain. Eventually it will become excessive and it will spiral.
Well,
Your crisis, yeah.
I've heard that the numbers for suicides and drug abuse increase after the storm.
For sure, after Harvey hit.
Right.
Because that is a precipitating event. That is a trigger or trauma. Okay, and so from that trauma, people have experienced excessive loss, right?
Right.
So they're losing homes, they're losing family, they're losing security, they're losing money, you know, they're losing jobs, all of these things that have taken place, right?
right.
And so if they don't have effective coping mechanisms, drugs and alcohol is going to become the coping mechanism.
And that's one of the things, too. I think it's about setting up a plan before, you know, and a lot of people are not educated on setting a coping plan or managing self
It's
plan.
not everyday conversation on how to manage yourself when there's a crisis.
Exactly.
Right.
And we're with ourselves all the time. So we should have, and what I created is what I call a toolbox for self-survival. And I created this for my psychology class. On day one, I pass this out and I have them, it seems so simple, but I get great feedback from the students and thanking me for doing it, because it's as simple as come up with at least 5 things that you can go to for solace. It can be talking to someone, a friend, or having a support system. It can be going for a walk. It can be doing yoga. Whatever the case may be, come up with at least 5 things and put it in your toolbox for self-survival. And I created that, and it's been doing really well, you know, because it's allowing individuals, because we have ups and downs in life. There's no way around it. And if we know that, why not prepare for it?
Right.
Prepare for the down, prepare for the ups. It's just like nature. It goes around. We're going to go up and we're going to go down.
Right.
It's just making preparation.
So there are going to be some more storms.
Some more
sure.
storms, exactly.
Well, you know what I find interesting is that how my observations, how people spend money for going to 24-hour fitness, the bio, to the beauty salon, barbershops, the bio, and psychological, and all these other areas, but we never take time to understand our breathing pattern, going back to your point that you made earlier of self-actualization in terms of knowing when you are unhealthy or
Exactly.
your psychological stability is not stable. You're on that zero.
Exactly.
You know, to know when you need to pull back, you need to pull a car over, go home, you know, meditate, breathe, those kind of things. So it seems like it needs to be some real education on knowing self.
Exactly.
Yep. And self-care.
And self-care.
Well, let me ask, Dr. Votes, how do you recommend people break away from the stigma of thinking it's just some ancient technique to benefit from yoga, alternative method?
I just think we have to do more platforms such as these. As educating individuals about the benefits of yoga, because when you hear yoga, again, you think of getting into a pose.
Right.
When the posture, and not to take away from the posture because it's very important, is not as important as what most people, when they think of yoga. It's more about the breathing. If you think about the breathing, most people breathe up in their chest because they're up breathing here and not allowing their whole body to breathe. If you think about a newborn baby whole body breathes. And then as they start interacting, we interact and progress through life as we develop, then we start restricting our breathing. I notice it all the time through yoga. I notice individuals in certain poses, they'll restrict their breathing because that's something.
They hold their breath.
Exactly. They'll hold their breath. Even when they're eating, take note of it. The first step is noticing yourself, how you're breathing when you're talking to certain individuals. You may breathe up in your chest with certain individuals. What is that telling you? You may have a full breath when you're speaking to some individuals. what is that telling you?
Yeah.
It's just a key of you taking note of yourself, and that's the foundation. I
Well,
think.
obviously, that's a whole different show I'm gonna have to develop here. That I don't think I've seen it in yoga or on the use of media source, but we're gonna have to develop that.
Demonstration?
Yes, we're
What
gonna
we
have to
all-
have Dr. Votes. I want to thank you. We're going to be changing up in a few minutes, and another guest is going to in. But you've certainly enlightened us about the techniques of breathing and meditation at that level. So hopefully we'll have you back in the future with some potential demonstration. Matthew, you got some leotards or something? Kenny?
I need to listen, brother. I do not wear leotards.
I didn't know what they call.
No, we don't wear leotards.
Okay, but we're going to ask the audience to join in too, and we're going to have some demonstrations, get some explanation about this breathing, these techniques of breathing, and that is true, very true, and we get a connection, because I think for some people that is a problem, and we need to address it. So would you be willing in the future to come back and visit us and potentially bring this to the light?
Yes, I'll be very interested in demonstrating.
Very good. Okay. All right, audience, you might have to get your leotards and be ready. We'll be letting you know more about that in the near future. And we're going to be coming back. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back. But first, we're going to have a major presentation by Ms. Brandon Gill.
Drugs. When they say they love you, you gonna say they won't. Because when you shake from the absence of a doctored way to deal to stay, they don't. I can't deal with you when you're like this, because every morning when you have to slowly kill yourself like ISIS because another person chose to give you some stuff people can see by the enlargement of your iris, they can roll with you when times are high fashion and recommended, but have to go ghost into the abyss from your heart until it's mended. By lunchtime, it's I've helped you all day and now you're mad. Physiologically, what the heck do you expect from what for years has been considered an FDA Breaking Bad? We get that our bodies go into changes and dead phases like mass shootings on gun ranges. We get that had we known the stuff Auntie was giving us would cause so much pain, we would have never gone insane and said, no, God dog it, I don't want that stuff, because that's all that you've ever known. How many years have you taken that? You would think she would have outgrown her pills. Oh no, it just got real, because this multi-billion-dollar industry is ill. We can't smoke weed because Texas is anti-abortion, but they will allow our minds to crumble like piece by piece in great portion. It's extortion. When you have a fit and no one knows what the heck to do, with a dead bolted poison running through the veins of you, when you try to leave it alone, your hands will shake like a 12-year-old on the first time talking on the phone. You'll slowly start to forget where things are and question why people have chilled with you so far. You wonder about what the ulterior motives and why they even stay around under the pressure of the phenomena of 2% of people by their own hand and up 6 feet underground. As I write these words, I question every last encounter this week of a hug, because if you really love us the way you say you do, you also have to love diabolical pharmaceutical drugs.
All right, thank you, Ms. Gill. We might be able to get a final wrap-up poem. You might need to find a third one before we close the show out with that kind of firepower. You've been looking at and listening to the Public Affairs, Public Access Show on Houston Media Source. I've been your host, Robert McKinley Gilmore Sr. There's some outstanding guests here. We're being joined now by our lawyer, our resident lawyer. Come on and say hi to everybody.
Well, it's good to be here, Dr. Gilmore, and the topic is so timely. I'm Attorney Lori Chambers Gray, and you have a very distinguished guest as roundtable, as usual. So.
Yes.
It continues.
We are engaging ourselves in this whole idea of the crisis that we're in. It's a crisis. It is a crisis. And Ms. McKinney has informed us it's 11 minutes, every 11 minutes, right?
A person dies by suicide.
But
Right.
during the same 11 minutes,
For every one person that dies, there are 25 attempts.
25 attempts.
That's right.
And Rev Matthews has already stated his naivete when he got into the ministry, thinking he had discernment powers.
Yeah, I thought I could part the Red
God
Sea.
gave him, and a lot of preachers become affected. The legitimacy of that is, attorney, that we have people who not only affect themselves, but they affect the families.
And it spills over in every aspect of life. I mean, you talk about the church, and let's talk about the criminal justice system for a moment. What happens is many of the crimes that a person is alleged to have committed requires a mental state. And I remember studying as a law student, mens rea. What does that mean? Do you have the mental ability, the capability to do, the intent to do what it is that
What's it called again?
you're mens rea?
Mens rea.
So
Big words tonight.
Very interesting one.
Do you have, was that your intent? Did you actually intend to rob someone? Or were you, lost or confused?
Right.
And that's what is the courts are having to sort through, and jurors are having to sort through. But in order to properly sort through that, testing is necessary in many cases. And many of the persons charged with criminal offenses have histories of mental illness. And so it all comes back together. But if there is not a proper diagnosis, then of course there won't be proper treatment.
Right.
And then that leads us back to the same vicious circle.
So
And the person,
is the court obligated to have people there who are trained to be able to assist?
well, the question is, it's twofold.
Right.
Because if the person doesn't know, and let's say the lawyer, because most lawyers, we're not trained in psychology.
Right.
We're not clinical psychologists.
Right.
We're lawyers. But you have to, in many cases, you have to ask yourself, does this person actually understand? Or do you somehow get the feeling that there needs to be a further investigation? And many of the cases that I've actually represented people in, the first time that they actually got an evaluation was actually after being arrested. And once the person says that I do need the help, I do want an evaluation, I'm looking into what happened. And then if there is no money for, if the person has no money in order to pay for that, then yes, the courts will pay for that.
I guess my question as Attorney Gray would be, how would that affect the criminal justice system if, based upon them seeking to find out if it's a mens rea case of someone having the intended purpose to do the crime that they've committed? I think the criminal justice system would be very much impacted, wouldn't you?
It absolutely would be. And you raise the question, and that's a legitimate question. In many cases, I've worked on cases where, say, there was a murder, but the person was found not guilty by reason of insanity. And so this person, according to what clinical psychologists said and all the evidence says, that she never had the ability to form the intent to kill someone in this particular case. And because she was incapable of being able to do so, she was found not guilty because there was an impairment. And then sometimes just saying that, well, say a person is suffering with a mental illness, it may not completely wipe away everything, especially you have cases where a person maybe has a diagnosis, but then they choose not to take the medication, and then they go and commit a crime. You can use this for mitigation and punishment. And so you could say, well, Lori may have done thus and so, but at the time she was impaired because she was not doing on her medication or what have you. And so you can take that into consideration. So sometimes it could be a complete exoneration of the person. The person could be found not guilty. And then other times it could be used as mitigation. But the most important thing is we need to ask the question. And then if the person needs help and they may not know it, then we as a society, a nation of laws, will have a duty to try to provide an answer.
Well, let me ask you a question that's relative to the legal system and suicide. You've heard the term, it's not in the DSM-5, suicide by police.
Yes.
I mean, is that a reality?
It is a reality in our society, and that has been the case in many communities, especially the minority community. We're here, and a person is obviously impaired, but they do something because they know, even though they are working with deficiencies, that if I call 911, the police is going to come. And then what's going to happen when they come to my neighborhood?
Yeah.
And what's going to happen if I look like I have a gun with my cell phone?
But McKinney, is that a defined,
That is something that we learn about in the world of suicide prevention and crisis intervention. We learn about suicide by cops specifically. It's a reality, and we do know that it does happen, and it has happened, where individuals will, like she mentioned, they will do something to provoke the police to shoot them, with every intent to be murdered, to be killed.
or the police to be, as you said, feel threatened, and all the person got is their cell phone.
Right.
Well, I know one of the things that was very interesting to me and a discovery when I participated with the Suicide Foundation. First of all, I didn't realize how many people were survivors of loved ones who committed suicide and the effects of that, which you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Right.
But in that session, when we were talking about faith-based communities facilitating or providing a safe place for people to have that discussion, we came across a term called homicide-suicide, which was an epiphany for me because my mother had just recently passed. She was diagnosed with bipolar, and she was suffering with chronic illness with diabetes.
Right.
And but her behavior was so different, right? And so she ended up buying pills on the street, trying to cope with her chronic illness because the healthcare system failed and wouldn't provide it, so forth, so on. Well, that awakening for me was to realize that she got so depressed as a result of all these physical illnesses that she became irresponsible about how she took her medication because she was trying to excuse herself from the pain and end up dying. And so,
is that what Dr. Votes was talking about earlier about the zero in the middle and the extreme? But the extreme would then become abnormal, right? It would be.
It is abnormal, but to the person who's in pain.
Right, that's what you said.
Who's trying to get relief. Now, how I was affected was the guilt.
Right.
Why didn't I recognize that?
Why didn't you recognize?
Why didn't I recognize that? And I guess for anybody,
for someone who's lost someone to suicide, and you mentioned how you had that same guilt when you had the parishioner who died by suicide in the church.
Right.
And we have many pastors, same with doctors, who have that guilt after a patient or one of their parishioners or their loved one dies by suicide. It's always that time period, and that's what makes the grief period so difficult, is that you blame yourself. I saw my brother the night before he died. I knew he wasn't feeling well. I knew that he had been sick. I didn't know that he was going to die by suicide, but because I am responsible for him as his sister, and I saw him the night before, it must be my fault that he died. And so it took me, I think that was the hardest part of me recovering and going through my grief journey in a healthy way.
But you're saying as his sister, you're not saying like you had a power of attorney.
No, just as his sister. But even for those who are caring for family members with mental illness, and they have power of attorney and they have all of these responsibilities to maintain that person, and they still die by suicide. That guilt and the embarrassment and the shame that comes with that, it's the idea that I failed in some kind of way.
But legally, you don't have there's no responsibility unless you have a power of attorney. We talking about emotionally, right?
Right, or it's that just the self-imposed.
Right, it's just a self-imposed guilt.
Yes, that, I should have known
Yeah.
that this was my sibling, my brother.
I've been more in touch.
Yes.
Yeah, but you go through so much drama with family members sometimes you don't want to be as connected. I know I have. I'm having a flashback on live TV, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, at least you have support, though.
Thank you very much.
Support.
Exactly.
And maybe that's the issue. Maybe that's the issue. Can a lawyer give support? Can a program give support? Can the church give support? Who gives the support for intervention?
I think everybody does. It's a responsibility of everyone. So it goes back to education. If we had attorneys who were educated on how to identify triggers for mental, or those kind of key red
Right.
flags for mental health, then they may help them in their cases, and they may help that individual get access to care. If you have family members and loved ones who have common conversations about how are you feeling, and really care about how the person feels, then you can identify and address those things in the child before they become an adult in the court system. And so there are things that I think there are proactive measures that can be taken. I think as a society we're very reactive, and so that we haven't trained our minds to get into a proactive mindset. Where's the education? Where's the access points? What services are available to that person? It starts with the people, with the circle of people closest to them. I'm going to be able to identify as a mother. The teachers are going to be able to identify as educators what's going on with my child if I'm paying attention.
And I think that's a good point because, you got to consider the factor of the education is an important piece because if not, then you think it's normal, right?
With the behavior?
With the behavior,
Or it's
And that's
labeled,
what you
or it's
say.
labeled
in
in
an
a different
environment
way.
where your mama been cussing you out when you was young,
You being traumatized.
right? You've been traumatized, right?
But as a lawyer, do you see people coming in who you recognize have on the border of the suicide or overdose, and now they in the legal mess?
Absolutely, and I do pay particular attention to that because over the many years, just seeing someone maybe for the first time and then following up with a phone call, and I know that phone call didn't go very well.
Yeah.
Or going in and giving bad news, and not having compassion.
Yeah.
It's not funny.
Yeah. No,
it's not a time to make light of a situation. And the best way that I found to deal with it is to prepare them for what's coming next.
Yeah.
Because everybody feels better when they know what's going to happen next. And to say that, well, maybe I think I need some help. I need to see a doctor. See, we need to have this conversation because it doesn't mean that you're weak.
Right.
If you're a male, a father, a brother, or a woman.
It's not a cop-out.
It's not a cop-out. What it is a recognition of where I am. And if I'm feeling like I need help and that I can't make myself well,
Right.
then I need to reach out to where I can find the help. And when we do that, the rewards are great. But
When you, I guess, when you look back, McKinney, do you think that would have been helpful for you?
What would have been helpful for me?
In other words, to be able to sense or see or understand, I don't have all the skills or support to help a person. And is that what the organization recommends to people now?
So for the American Foundation for Suicide
Right.
Prevention, what they recommend for folks is to, if you're, and just to make sure that I'm answering your question
Right.
correctly, I think what they recommend is for those individuals who are helping a family member who's having a mental health problem.
Right.
You have to understand and identify what your limitations are as the helper.
Right.
You can only help a person as much as they allow you to, whether you have the legal backing to
Right.
do that or not. And then you have to, as a survivor of suicide loss, and this is coming from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention as well, there's a period of acceptance that you have to come to, where you identify that I did all I could within the realm that they allowed me to. And that once you get to that point, then you can move to healing as a survivor of suicide loss. You know, I definitely highly recommend for anyone who's lost a loved one to suicide, to definitely get help for yourself immediately.
Say that again.
Get help for yourself. If you're caring for someone, immediately, for sure. And if you're caring for someone with a mental health problem, just like they go see their therapist, you need to go see one too. Because that's stressful for you as well. Toxic stress is real.
Well, you know, I had a question about the educational piece, because we hear a lot about young people who are committing suicide in schools. So is the discussion putting the idea in their head?
And it's a very common, and that's a very common concern, and that's what makes it sometimes difficult for us to go into the schools and talk to students, because people are concerned that, well, if we bring it up, then that's going to put the thought into their head. My response to that is, there are red flags that you can identify. My job is to teach you how to identify those. With suicide being the extremely high leading cause of death for teens, the thought is there already. Our jobs is to be able to learn to identify them, and then create access to help and care, and create an environment where children can receive help. But that is definitely a common, especially, and parents are very concerned about that as well. Well, if I talk to my child about suicide, then I don't know what'll happen.
So what would be some of those red flags? I would think things like isolation,
social isolation,
not
for sure.
eating,
or eating too much. So changes in eating and sleeping habits, for sure. Isolating themselves, it's just a change in their demeanor, you know, and you are going to look for those things like maybe they're talking about death and dying more often. You know, they're not associating with certain friends anymore. Grades are failing, and I'm talking in terms of teens and college students too. Grades are failing. They're not keeping themselves up. They're not very concerned about their health and their well-being and their appearance. Those are all red flags and triggers, or not triggers, but those are all red flags that we can identify. You know, and so one of the campaigns that just came out is to embrace the awkward, which is a really great campaign that's supported by the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention for teens, to be able to identify if there's something different about my friend, then let me embrace that awkward moment of silence and break it and talk to them about the S word. Talk to them about depression, mental illness. And I noticed this changed in you, and you're not keeping yourself up anymore. Or, you know, how friends talk to each other. You've been looking a hot mess for a couple of weeks. What's wrong?
I think
so those are
great.
things that need to talk about it.
So as a faith-based coordinator, you know, working in the ministry, working with churches, how would you recommend we package that to deliver it in the faith community, to where we can appeal to youth to come and be a part of some kind of discussion, or without addressing it right on the nose, or directly, should I say?
So I think you have a round table just like this. And the fact that you want to embrace the youth in the conversation is very welcoming for teens, because a lot of times when we're doing this work, we forget the voice of the child and the kids. And that's the only people that we're going to be able to learn from, because when a teen is suicidal, they're not coming to us. They're coming to their friends. So we need them to sit at the table with us and tell us, what can we do to help you guys? And have a very good conversation. And then you train those kids on those teens on how to identify the warning signs and how to get their friend help. You know, don't keep the secret. Let your friend be mad at you, but make a call. Call a crisis hotline, or go to the counselor at school, or go to the counselor or the youth pastor at the church. You know, and so it really is about just laying out those steps and those points for the kids. You know,
you know, we're cutting it down. We got more information, but obviously the website is available.
Absolutely. AFSP.org / Southeast Texas. That's our local chapter here, and we cover most of the Southeast Texas region, which includes Galveston and several other counties north of here as well. So we go all over. We'll take requests.
All right. I want to thank you for being here with the idea that the suicide is a key element we've got to address. You'll be coming back. You might have to get some leotards yourself.
No, I ain't able to do all that now.
Tony, I want to thank you again.
Thank you for
It's
having
always a
me.
blessing to have you give us the legal insight. Certainly, we got to remain vigilant.
Yes.
Make sure our court systems are sensitive.
Absolutely.
I want to say thank you for that.
It's not a weakness. That's the word. It's not a weakness.
It's not a weakness.
Not at all.
It's not a weakness.
Not at all.
It's not a weakness. And doctor, we We, again, dealing with these issues of mental health in the community and church.
Yes, sir.
Can we depend on the organizations like NAMI and MHA and others to be supportive?
I think so, and NAMI has demonstrated their willingness
Yes.
to have those kind of
Done so
relationships
much.
and partnerships.
Right.
I'm proud to say that, hopefully this book will be coming out this year to talk about
Right.
faith-based connections. NAMI is certainly one of those organizations
Right.
who has a nice manual that I work from
Right.
to help the faith-based implement that, and certainly the suicide prevention foundation group with this Ms. McKinney, who I've worked with, who's very open to working with the faith-based community. So I've just made a personal commitment myself
Right.
to take that role of coordinating resources
Right.
and working with the faith community so that we can have safe places, a house of refuge, where we can see the power of God and the Holy Spirit come through. So actually, that dream will come alive. I won't part the Red Sea.
Right.
However, I can see a life being transformed.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was trying to get out with a final poem, but I've been your host, Robert McKinley Gilmore Sr. This has been Public Affairs, Public Access, the Use Media Source. We got to do it again. Might have to get your leotards. Ms. Gill, could you give us a poem as a thought?
I sure can.
We're leaving.
This is dedicated to those who have been prescribed medication when the doctor had another option and responsibility. Be real. You play the role of someone else and you are unaware of the things that you do, as you obviously do not care. While you smile in my face, you frown behind my back. From my front, you shake my hand, but from behind, you attack. I'm tired of your lies and I'm over all your games. You crush so many hearts and you put so many others to shame. You probably think it's okay because you can't see others' tears because their self-esteem has been ruined enough throughout the years. It takes so much energy to put on your show. Why can't you just be truthful and be the one you really know? There's a cloth of wool over your eyes if you can't see who you've become. So don't act like you don't speak badly of everyone. I just know that I'm tired of being hurt. This is no more I will take, because you say you're being yourself and you are just being fake. No one believes you anymore. You are completely untrue and you think you're fooling me, but the only one you're fooling is you.